For more than 100 years, one question has quietly followed human history. Who really controls the world? From secret societies in the 1700s to powerful institutions today, many believe real decisions are made far away from the public eye. The name Illuminati has become part of this mystery, but its real story is often misunderstood. In this documentary, we step away from internet rumors and focus on real history. We explore how the Illuminati began, how it disappeared, and why fear of hidden power never did. Through wars, banking systems, elite meetings, and the rise of the digital world, this video reveals how secrecy became normal and why people still feel controlled by forces they cannot see. Chapter 1: The Birth of the Illuminati. In the late 1700s, Europe was a place of quiet tension. Kings still ruled by birthright, churches shaped law and daily life, and open criticism of authority could cost a person their career, or worse. Yet beneath the surface, ideas were moving faster than armies. New books were being printed. Private letters carried bold thoughts across borders. Coffee houses and salons became places where people spoke more freely than they ever could in public. This period would later be called the Enlightenment. It was not a single movement, and it was not peaceful. It was a slow shift in how people understood power, reason, and knowledge. Thinkers began asking whether rulers truly ruled by divine right, whether education should be controlled by religious orders, and whether ordinary people had a right to shape their own futures. These questions were dangerous, and because they were dangerous, many of them were discussed quietly, behind closed doors. This is where secret societies enter the story. By the mid-18th century, secret groups were not unusual in Europe. Some were social clubs, some were philosophical circles, others were fraternal orders that mixed symbolism with loyalty and ritual. Freemasonry was the most visible example, attracting nobles, merchants, and scholars alike. While Masonic lodges did not all share the same beliefs, they offered something rare for the time, a private space where ideas could be exchanged across class and religious lines. In 1776, in the city of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, a young law professor watched this world closely. His name was Adam Weishaupt. He was well-educated, deeply interested in philosophy, and frustrated by the limits placed on teaching and learning. The university where he worked was still heavily influenced by religious authority. Certain books were discouraged, certain ideas were unsafe to discuss openly. Weishaupt believed knowledge should be free from religious control. He believed education should shape critical thinkers, not obedient followers. And he believed that real reform could not happen in public. Not yet. The political environment was simply too restrictive, so he chose another path. On May 1st, 1776, Weishaupt founded a small secret group. He called it the Order of the Illuminati. The name came from the idea of enlightenment, of bringing light to ignorance. At first, the group was tiny, just a handful of men, meeting quietly, sharing writings, and outlining long-term goals. The early Illuminati were not plotting revolutions. They were focused on personal development and education. Members were encouraged to study philosophy, question superstition, and think independently. Weishaupt designed the group with clear rules and stages of advancement. New members did not learn everything at once. Trust had to be earned. This structure served two purposes. It protected the group from outside scrutiny, and it allowed leaders to guide members slowly, shaping how they thought. Letters from the time show that Weishaupt believed change should come gradually, through influence rather than force. At first, the order struggled to grow. Bavaria was small, open recruitment was risky. Then the Illuminati found an opportunity that would change everything. Freemasonry already had lodges across Europe. Many educated men were members. Some lodges were open to new ideas, others were more traditional. Weishaupt realized that if the Illuminati could recruit Masons, the order could expand quietly without drawing attention. This decision marked a turning point. Illuminati members began joining Masonic lodges, not to control them, but to recruit from within them. This is not speculation. Surviving membership lists and correspondence show overlapping names. By the early 1780s, the Illuminati had hundreds of members across German-speaking regions. Some were nobles, some were civil servants, a few held positions close to power. The order's goals also became more ambitious. Internal documents speak of reducing superstition, limiting the influence of the church over education, and encouraging moral behavior guided by reason rather than fear. These ideas were radical for the time. They challenged institutions that had shaped Europe for centuries. Secrecy, however, brought consequences. As the Illuminati grew, so did rumors. Not everyone who joined fully understood the group's purpose. Some were uncomfortable with its strict internal discipline. Others disagreed with Weishaupt's leadership style, which could be controlling. A few former members began to talk. At the same time, authorities were already nervous. Bavaria was a Catholic state. The idea of a secret group promoting secular education was alarming. Pamphlets began circulating, accusing secret societies of undermining religion and loyalty to the state. In a climate already tense from political change elsewhere in Europe, suspicion spread quickly. By 1784, the Bavarian government took action. Edicts were issued banning unauthorized secret societies. Illuminati meetings were declared illegal. Homes were searched. Letters were seized. What makes this moment important is not just the crackdown itself, but the records it produced. Government officials confiscated internal Illuminati documents, membership lists, initiation texts, and private correspondence. These papers survive today in archives. They show an organization far more focused on education and influence than on violence or rebellion. But they also reveal how tightly controlled the group had become and how easily secrecy could be misunderstood. Within a few years, the Illuminati were effectively dismantled. Weishaupt lost his position and fled Bavaria. By the late 1780s, the order no longer operated openly in any form that can be documented. On paper, the story seems to end there. Yet even as the organization disappeared, its name did not. The idea of a secret group working quietly to shape society proved far more powerful than the group itself. Writers, clergy, and political figures across Europe began using the Illuminati as a symbol, sometimes of dangerous reform, sometimes of hidden influence. Chapter 2. The suppression that didn't end the idea. When the Bavarian authorities moved against the Illuminati in the mid-1780s, they believed they were ending a problem before it spread. From their point of view, the situation was simple. A secret group had formed without state approval. It promoted ideas that challenged church influence, and it operated quietly inside other organizations. In an age when loyalty to ruler and religion was considered the foundation of order, that was enough to justify intervention. In 1784 and 1785, a series of edicts were issued in Bavaria, banning all unauthorized secret societies. The Illuminati were not named at first, but everyone knew who the orders were aimed at. Police raids followed, homes were searched, private letters were seized, members were questioned, some lost government posts, others were pressured to publicly distance themselves from the order. What makes this moment unusual in history is how much evidence it left behind. Because the state took the Illuminati seriously, officials preserved what they found. Confiscated documents were archived rather than destroyed. These papers included internal rules, lists of members, coded names, and philosophical writings. Today, historians rely heavily on these records. They are the main reason we can speak with confidence about what the Illuminati actually were. But suppression did something the Bavarian government did not expect. It pushed the Illuminati out of reality and into imagination. Before the ban, most people had never heard of the group. After the ban, everyone was talking about it. Newspapers reported on the raids. Clergy warned from pulpits about hidden enemies of faith. Political writers began connecting the Illuminati to wider unrest across Europe. The name spread faster after the group was dismantled than it ever had while it existed. This pattern is important. Once the Illuminati could no longer respond, others began speaking for them. One of the earliest and most influential voices was a French priest named Augustin Barruel. Writing in the 1790s during the chaos of the French Revolution, Barruel argued that secret societies were behind the collapse of traditional order. In his view, the Illuminati were not just a German group. They were part of a larger, coordinated attack on monarchy and religion across Europe. Barruel's claims were not based on new evidence. They were interpretations shaped by fear and political shock. France had just overthrown its king. The church had lost power. People wanted explanations that felt proportional to the upheaval they were living through. A hidden enemy fit that need. Around the same time, a Scottish scientist named John Robison published his own work warning of secret societies. Reinvention had once been a Freemason and felt betrayed by what he believed was ideological infiltration. Like Barul, he linked the Illuminati to wider revolutionary movements, even though direct proof was thin. Together, these books traveled widely. They were translated, reprinted, and discussed across Europe and North America. For many readers, this was their first introduction to the Illuminati, and it was not a neutral one. The group was no longer a small Enlightenment circle from Bavaria. It had become a symbol of hidden control. What is often missed is that these writers were reacting to real fear, not inventing stories for entertainment. The late 18th century was unstable. Revolutions, wars, and economic change were reshaping societies quickly. Traditional explanations no longer felt sufficient. Secret societies became a way to explain rapid change without accepting that old systems might simply be failing. Meanwhile, the real Illuminati were gone. Adam Weishaupt spent the rest of his life in exile. He continued writing, but he no longer had an organization. Former members returned to normal careers or faded from records. There is no credible evidence of a continued central Illuminati leadership after the Bavarian ban. No meetings, no letters, no financial trails. The historical silence is real. Yet the idea kept growing. In the early 1800s, the word Illuminati began appearing in political debates far removed from Germany. In the United States, for example, some ministers warned that Illuminati ideas threatened the young republic. Sermons claimed that European secret groups were trying to undermine American values. Again, no evidence was offered, only suspicion. What mattered was not accuracy, but usefulness. The Illuminati became a warning label. It could be attached to anything that felt unfamiliar, secular, or elite. Banking reforms, educational changes, and philosophical movements could all be framed as part of a hidden plan. The original group's actual goals were rarely mentioned. This is how the idea separated from the facts. By the mid-19th century, historians had access to the Bavarian documents. They could see that the Illuminati had been limited in size and time. But popular culture did not follow academic caution. Stories travel differently than archives. Once a narrative enters public imagination, correction becomes difficult. It is also worth noting that secrecy itself did not disappear. Other private societies continued to exist. Political clubs, intellectual circles, and fraternal orders remained part of social life. Most were legal, some were influential. None called themselves the Illuminati, but for critics, names no longer mattered. The label had become symbolic. The suppression of the Illuminati did not erase a fear of hidden power. It sharpened it. Chapter 3. The Illuminati name in 19th century power circles. By the early 1800s, the original Illuminati were gone, but their name had taken on a life of its own. This was a different Europe now. The French Revolution had shaken monarchies. Napoleon's wars had redrawn borders. Old empires were trying to hold together, while new political ideas kept spreading. Power no longer looked the way it once had, and people were struggling to understand who really held it. In this environment, the word Illuminati stopped referring to a specific group and began functioning as a shortcut. It became a way to talk about influence that felt distant, private, or unreachable. When decisions were made behind closed doors, people searched for familiar labels. The Illuminati name was already loaded with fear, secrecy, and betrayal. It fit easily. Throughout the 19th century, private networks became more important, not less. Industrialization created new wealth. Banking families gained influence that rivaled old aristocracies. Governments relied on advisors, financiers, and administrators who rarely faced public scrutiny. None of this was hidden in the sense of being illegal, but much of it happened out of public view. This is where confusion began. Political writers and pamphleteers started using Illuminati as a loose term for elite coordination. It did not matter that the Bavarian order had been dismantled decades earlier. The name now represented a fear that power was moving away from visible rulers and into private hands. One example appears in the revolutions of 1848. Across Europe, citizens demanded constitutions, representation, and rights. When these movements failed or were crushed, some commentators blamed secret influences rather than military force or political compromise. Newspapers accused unnamed elites of manipulating events from behind the scenes. Again, the Illuminati label surfaced, not as a claim of survival, but as an explanation for disappointment. At the same time, fraternal organizations continued to thrive. Freemasonry expanded across Europe and the Americas. These lodges varied widely in belief and purpose. Some were social clubs. Others focused on charity or philosophy. Yet because they met privately and used symbolism, they attracted suspicion. Critics often blurred the line between Freemasonry and the Illuminati, despite clear historical differences. This blending of ideas mattered. It allowed people to imagine continuity where none could be proven. In the United States, the pattern repeated. The early republic valued transparency in theory, but elite networks still existed in practice. Lawyers, politicians, and businessmen formed tight circles, often through education or family ties. These networks shaped policy and opportunity. To some observers, especially those outside these circles, the system felt closed. By the 1820s and 1830s, anti-Masonic movements gained traction in America. Although these movements targeted Freemasonry specifically, Illuminati fears often appeared in the background. Preachers and activists warned that secret oaths threatened democracy. Once again, the historical Illuminati were invoked as proof that secrecy led to corruption. What is important here is what did not happen. There were no discovered letters linking 19th century elites to Adam Weishaupt's order. There were no rituals passed down, no leadership councils, no financial records showing continuity. The connection existed in language, not in evidence. Still, language has power. As the century progressed, new forces reshaped society. Railroads connected nations. Telegraphs spread information instantly. Stock markets expanded. Decisions made in one city could affect millions elsewhere. For ordinary people, these systems felt overwhelming. When outcomes seemed unfair or confusing, hidden coordination felt like a reasonable explanation. Writers began crafting stories that reflected this anxiety. Novels and essays portrayed shadowy groups influencing kings and markets. These works were often fictional, but they borrowed real names to feel believable. The Illuminati by then were perfect material. They were distant enough to be mysterious and documented enough to feel real. By the late 1800s, historians had a clearer picture of the original order. Academic studies based on Bavarian archives showed the Illuminati's limited lifespan, but these studies rarely reached the general public. Popular understanding followed emotion more than documentation. This created a split that still exists today. On one side, the historical record showed a small Enlightenment group that failed. On the other, public imagination saw a symbol of endless, unseen influence. It is also during this period that the idea of elite continuity took root. Families that maintained wealth across generations were viewed with suspicion. Educational institutions that produced leaders year after year were seen as gatekeepers. None of this required conspiracy to function, but it felt exclusionary. The Illuminati name absorbed all of these feelings. By the end of the 19th century, the term no longer described an organization. It described a belief that power was no longer held openly, and that ordinary people were being left out of decisions that shaped their lives. The historical details faded, replaced by a broader narrative about control and secrecy. Chapter 4: American Secret Societies and Elite Networks. By the time the 19th century reached its middle years, the idea of hidden influence had crossed the Atlantic. The United States was still young, still defining what power should look like in a republic. On paper, authority came from voters. In reality, influence often flowed through quieter channels: education, family ties, business partnerships, and private clubs. This gap between ideal and reality created tension. Early America did not reject secrecy outright. In fact, some of the country's founders were members of private societies themselves. These groups were not formed to rule from the shadows, but to create trust among men who shared values, education, or social standing. In a nation without an old aristocracy, networks replaced titles. One of the earliest and most controversial examples was Freemasonry. Masonic lodges spread quickly across the United States in the late 1700s and early 1800s. They offered fellowship, moral teaching, and social connection. Membership included merchants, lawyers, judges, and politicians. Meetings were private, rituals were symbolic, and oaths were taken seriously. At first, this caused little concern, but in 1826, everything changed. That year, a former Mason named William Morgan disappeared in New York after threatening to publish a book revealing Masonic rituals. He was last seen being taken away by men linked to local lodges. Morgan was never found. While the full truth of his fate remains unclear, the public reaction was immediate and intense. Many Americans saw the incident as proof that secret societies protected their own at any cost. Courts struggled to prosecute suspects who belonged to lodges. Witnesses refused to testify. To ordinary citizens, it looked like a parallel system of loyalty operating above the law. This moment matters because it reshaped public trust. The anti-Masonic movement quickly became the first major third political party in U.S. history. Newspapers warned of hidden oaths undermining democracy. Preachers linked secret societies to European corruption. And once again, the word Illuminati appeared, not as a factual claim, but as a warning. The fear was not about a specific group returning, it was about secrecy itself. As the century progressed, American power became more complex. The country expanded westward. Railroads connected cities. Industry created immense fortunes. With wealth came influence, and with influence came private coordination. Elite universities became gateways. Certain schools produced lawyers, financiers, and policymakers at a disproportionate rate. Alumni networks created lifelong connections. Business deals were discussed in private rooms, not public halls. None of this was illegal, but it was invisible to most people. By the late 1800s, some private societies became closely tied to these elite pathways. One of the most discussed was a senior society at Yale University, founded in 1832. Membership was secret. Selection was limited. Members often went on to hold powerful roles in law, banking, intelligence, and government. Here again, the pattern repeats. There is no evidence that these groups controlled the country or followed a hidden master plan. But there is clear evidence that they created durable networks. Trust formed early. Opportunities flowed within circles. Decisions were influenced by personal connection rather than public debate. For critics, this felt uncomfortably similar to the fears Europeans once had about secret orders. The language shifted, but the anxiety stayed the same. Who really makes decisions, and how do they know each other? By the early 20th century, these concerns blended with global events. Wars required coordination between government and industry. Financial systems grew too complex for most citizens to understand. Policies were shaped by advisors whose names rarely appeared in headlines. At this point, the Illuminati idea changed again. It was no longer tied to Enlightenment philosophy or church reform. In America, it became a symbol of elite continuity. The belief that the same families, schools, and institutions quietly guided the nation across generations. Whether true or exaggerated, the perception mattered. Importantly, historians can trace the networks. Membership lists, career paths, and institutional records exist. What they do not show is a single controlling organization. Influence was fragmented, not unified. Competing interests existed even within elite circles. Yet from the outside, complexity looks like coordination. By the end of this part, a clear picture emerges. American secret societies were real. Elite networks were real. They shaped careers and policy in subtle ways, but they were not the Illuminati reborn. Instead, they became a new canvas onto which old fears were projected. Chapter 5: Banking Power and the Fear of Invisible Control. By the late 1800s, power in the modern world was no longer measured only in land or armies. It was measured in credit, debt, and confidence. Nations could rise or fall based on markets most citizens never saw and could not influence. For many people, this shift felt unsettling. Decisions that shaped daily life were now made in offices far from town halls, using numbers instead of votes. Banking had always existed, but industrialization changed its scale. Railroads required massive investment. Factories needed steady credit. International trade tied distant economies together. To keep this system running, banks grew larger and more interconnected. A small group of financiers began advising governments, stabilizing markets, and rescuing failing industries. None of this was secret in a legal sense. Names appeared in newspapers. Meetings were reported, but understanding what was happening required technical knowledge most people did not have. That gap between visibility and comprehension became fertile ground for fear. In the United States, this tension reached a breaking point in 1907. That year, a financial panic spread rapidly. Banks failed, businesses collapsed. Ordinary people rushed to withdraw savings. There was no central authority capable of stepping in. The government lacked the tools to stabilize the system. The crisis was stopped not by elected officials, but by private bankers. J.P. Morgan, one of the most powerful financiers of the era, coordinated emergency loans from his library in New York. Bankers met behind closed doors. They decided which institutions would be saved and which would be allowed to fail. Their actions prevented a total collapse, but the message was clear. Private financial power had become essential to national survival. For many Americans, this was alarming. Why, they asked, should a handful of unelected men hold that kind of influence? Why did the government depend on private wealth to protect the economy? These questions were debated openly, but the answers were complex. Stability required coordination. Coordination required trust. Trust often required privacy. Out of this crisis came a push for reform. Politicians, economists, and bankers agreed on one thing: the system could not continue without a central mechanism to manage crises. But agreeing on how to build that mechanism was difficult. Banking interests feared government overreach. Populists feared elite control. Everyone feared another collapse. In 1910, a small group gathered at a private resort on Jekyll Island, off the coast of Georgia. They traveled quietly and used first names only. The reason was not conspiracy, but politics. Public knowledge of bankers designing financial reform could have killed the effort before it began. The men involved represented major financial institutions and government interests. Over several days, they drafted a plan for a central banking system. This plan would later form the backbone of the Federal Reserve. The meeting became one of the most cited moments in modern conspiracy history, yet the basic facts are well documented. The secrecy was strategic, not sinister. Still, perception mattered more than intent. When the Federal Reserve Act passed in 1913, it created a system that blended public authority with private banks. The goal was stability. The structure was complex by design. Independence was meant to protect monetary policy from short-term political pressure. But complexity looks like secrecy from the outside. Almost immediately, critics claimed the system favored bankers over citizens. Some argued that money creation had been handed to private interests. Others warned that democracy was being quietly replaced by financial control. Once again, the Illuminati name appeared, not as evidence, but as a familiar explanation. What people were reacting to was not a hidden group, but a loss of transparency. Money now moved through institutions most people never interacted with directly. Interest rates changed, credit tightened or loosened, jobs appeared or vanished. These effects were real, but the causes were abstract. It felt as though invisible hands were shaping lives. During economic crises, this feeling intensified. The Great Depression deepened distrust. Bank failures wiped out savings. Governments struggled to respond. While reforms followed, suspicion lingered. Each intervention raised the same question: who benefits first? Throughout the 20th century, banking power continued to grow. International institutions formed. Financial decisions crossed borders instantly. Markets reacted faster than laws. For ordinary citizens, this reinforced a sense of distance from control. Importantly, historians find no evidence of a single coordinated group directing global finance. Banks competed fiercely, governments intervened aggressively, mistakes were frequent and costly. Chaos, not control, defined many outcomes. But emotionally, chaos is harder to accept than intention. Believing that someone is in charge, even secretly, can feel more comforting than accepting that systems are fragile and unpredictable. This is why the fear of invisible control persisted. The Illuminati idea adapted once again, attaching itself not to philosophers or secret lodges, but to balance sheets and boardrooms. As this part comes to a natural pause, one truth stands out. Banking power reshaped the modern world in ways few people could see or understand. That distance bred suspicion. Whether justified or not, It changed how people talked about influence forever. Chapter 6. World Wars and the Expansion of Elite Coordination. When the world moved into the 20th century, secrecy stopped being optional. It became a tool of survival. Nations were no longer fighting short, contained wars. They were entering conflicts that required total coordination of industry, finance, science, and information. Power had to move quickly, and public debate was often too slow. World War I marked the first major shift. Governments suddenly depended on factories, banks, shipping companies, and research institutions to function as extensions of the state. Weapons had to be produced at scale. Food had to be rationed. Economies had to be redirected almost overnight. To make this work, leaders relied on small groups of advisors who could operate efficiently and quietly. This was not done to deceive the public. It was done because openness in wartime could cost lives. Still, the result was the same as before. Decisions with enormous impact were being made out of sight. During the war, governments formed committees that brought together generals, industrialists, scientists, and financiers. These groups coordinated production, logistics, and strategy. Many of their meetings were classified, records were sealed. Even after the war ended, much of what had happened remained unknown for years. For ordinary citizens, the experience was disorienting. One day, the country was at peace. The next, factories were working around the clock, prices were controlled, and young men were sent overseas. The system worked, but it felt distant and overwhelming. After the war, the secrecy did not disappear. Instead, it became institutionalized. The peace settlements themselves were negotiated behind closed doors. Borders were redrawn, new nations were created, old empires collapsed. Many people affected by these decisions had no voice in them. When instability followed, as it often did, critics looked for hidden planners rather than flawed compromises. Between the wars, elite coordination increased rather than decreased. Governments recognized that modern problems crossed borders. Economics, security, and diplomacy were now linked. To manage this complexity, permanent policy groups began to form. These organizations brought together experts who could advise leaders without the pressure of elections. From the inside, this looked like responsible planning. From the outside, it looked like power drifting away from the public. Then came World War II, and secrecy expanded even further. This was a war fought not just with soldiers, but with intelligence, science, and information. Entire programs were hidden from public view. Scientific breakthroughs were classified. Intelligence agencies grew rapidly. Governments cooperated with private companies on an unprecedented scale. Most citizens knew none of the details. They were told what they needed to know and no more. After the war, the scale of what had been hidden slowly came into view. Declassified documents revealed operations that had shaped the conflict from behind the scenes. Alliances were formed quietly. Technologies were developed in secret. Entire strategies were invisible until years later. For many people, this was a shock. If governments could hide this much during war, what else might they be hiding during peace? This question lingered into the Cold War. The threat of nuclear conflict made secrecy feel permanent. Intelligence agencies became central players in global politics. Covert operations influenced foreign governments. Information itself became a weapon. Again, much of this is documented history. Files were later released. Testimonies were given. But at the time, the public saw only fragments. Rumors filled the gaps. This is where elite coordination took on a darker image. People were no longer just worried about bankers or private clubs. They were worried about permanent structures of power that existed beyond elections. Military planners, intelligence analysts, policy advisors, people whose names never appeared on ballots, seemed to shape the future. The Illuminati idea adapted once more. It was no longer about secret societies meeting in candlelit rooms. It was about modern systems that required secrecy to function. To those inside, secrecy meant security. To those outside, it felt like exclusion. Importantly, historians do not find evidence of a single group controlling these processes. Wartime coordination was often messy. Agencies competed, mistakes were common, decisions were driven by fear as much as by strategy. The image of perfect control does not match the record, but perception does not follow footnotes. For the average person living through rationing, blackouts, and propaganda, it was hard to believe that so much power could exist without a hidden hand guiding it. The scale of coordination felt too large to be accidental. As this part comes to a natural pause, one theme stands out. The world wars did not create secret power, but they normalized secrecy at the highest levels. From that point on, elite coordination was no longer unusual. It was expected. Chapter 7: The Cold War and the Rise of Shadow Narratives. When the Second World War ended, peace did not bring clarity. It brought tension of a different kind. The world split into opposing camps, each convinced the other was hiding dangerous intentions. This period would become known as the Cold War, and more than any era before it, it reshaped how secrecy and power were understood by ordinary people. For the first time, nations lived under the constant threat of total destruction. Nuclear weapons meant that a single decision, made in a private room, could affect the entire planet. Because of this, governments argued that secrecy was no longer just practical, it was essential. Information had to be controlled. Plans had to be hidden. Even knowledge itself became classified. Intelligence agencies expanded rapidly during this time. Their role was to gather information, influence foreign governments, and prevent surprise attacks. Much of what they did was invisible by design. Operations were denied. Documents were sealed. Budgets were hidden inside larger programs. For citizens, this created a strange contradiction. They were told they lived in open societies, yet some of the most important actions taken in their name could not be discussed. This gap between democratic ideals and secret reality created deep unease. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, rumors flourished. Stories circulated about mind control experiments, covert coups, and hidden alliances. Some of these stories were exaggerated or false. Others turned out, years later, to be partially true. When classified files were eventually released, they revealed that governments had indeed carried out secret experiments, misinformation campaigns, and foreign interventions. The details mattered less than the pattern. Each revelation confirmed a growing suspicion. Powerful institutions could act without public knowledge for long periods of time. For many people, this realization permanently changed how they viewed authority. The media environment of the Cold War intensified this effect. Propaganda was everywhere. Both sides accused the other of secret plots and hidden agendas. Citizens were encouraged to be vigilant, to question loyalty, to watch for unseen threats. Fear became part of daily life, even when nothing visible was happening. In this atmosphere, shadow narratives thrived. The Illuminati idea, which had already evolved many times, adapted again. It was no longer tied to history books or secret lodges. It became a way to talk about the feeling that something important was always happening behind the scenes. When information was missing, imagination filled the space. Popular culture played a role as well. Films, novels, and television shows portrayed secret agencies and hidden rulers as central forces shaping events. These stories reflected real anxieties. They did not create distrust from nothing. They amplified what people were already feeling. At the same time, real secrecy continued to expand. The arms race required classified research. Space programs operated behind security clearances. Economic strategies were debated in private councils. International agreements were negotiated quietly before being announced publicly. Each step made sense on its own. Together, they created a world where transparency felt limited. For many citizens, it became difficult to tell where necessary secrecy ended and manipulation began. This uncertainty had consequences. Trust in institutions declined. Official explanations were questioned more aggressively. When leaders spoke, some listeners assumed there was more being left unsaid. Even truthful statements were filtered through suspicion. Importantly, historians studying this period do not find evidence of a single hidden group directing global events. Power was fragmented. Governments disagreed internally. Intelligence agencies competed. Mistakes were frequent, sometimes catastrophic. The Cold War was defined more by miscalculation than by perfect control. But emotionally, fragmentation is hard to accept. It is easier to believe that someone is in charge than to accept that the world is shaped by fear, error, and chance. Shadow narratives offer structure where reality feels unstable. They turn confusion into intention. By the 1970s, public trust reached a breaking point in several countries. Political scandals revealed abuse of power. Investigations uncovered illegal surveillance and covert actions against citizens. These were not imagined conspiracies. They were documented facts. Each exposure reinforced the same lesson: secrecy could be abused. Yet even then, secrecy did not disappear. Governments reformed some practices, but intelligence and security work remained largely hidden. The Cold War continued, and with it, the belief that unseen forces were always at work. As this part comes to a natural pause, one shift is clear. During the Cold War, suspicion stopped being tied to specific groups and became a general mindset. The fear was no longer just about who held power, but about how little of that power could be seen. Chapter 8: Global Conferences and Modern Elite Gatherings. By the late 20th century, the world was more connected than ever before. Flights crossed oceans in hours. Markets reacted in seconds. A decision made in one country could ripple across continents before most people even heard about it. Managing that kind of interdependence required constant coordination, and much of that coordination happened away from cameras. This was not new, but it became more visible. Governments, corporations, and international institutions began holding regular private meetings to discuss global issues. Some focused on economics, others on security, technology, or diplomacy. Attendance was usually limited. Discussions were informal. No binding votes were taken. These gatherings were meant to allow leaders to speak freely without political pressure or public posturing. From the inside, the logic was simple. Complex problems need honest conversation. Honest conversation is difficult when every sentence is recorded and judged in real time. From the outside, it looked very different. When people learned that powerful figures were meeting behind closed doors, suspicion followed naturally. Questions arose immediately. What are they really discussing? Why can't the public hear it? Who decides who gets invited? One of the most talked about examples emerged in the 1950s, when an annual private conference brought together political leaders, business executives, academics, and media figures from Europe and North America. There were no press conferences, no official statements. Attendees were asked not to publicly attribute comments to individuals. Nothing illegal was happening. The existence of the meetings was not secret, yet the lack of transparency made the gatherings controversial almost from the start. Supporters argued that the meetings encouraged open dialogue between groups that rarely spoke honestly in public. They said the goal was understanding, not control. Critics were unconvinced. To them, the setting itself suggested exclusion. If ideas were harmless, why not discuss them openly? This tension reflected a deeper shift in society. By this point, people had lived through decades of secrecy justified by war, intelligence, and national security. They had seen classified programs revealed years later. They had watched institutions insist on trust while withholding information. When new private forums appeared, many assumed the worst, not because of evidence, but because of history. The modern media environment amplified this reaction. Unlike earlier eras, information now spread instantly. Attendee lists were shared online, photos were analyzed, travel patterns were tracked, small details were treated as clues. The absence of information became evidence in itself. In this environment, elite gatherings were no longer judged only by what they did, but by what they did not show. Importantly, investigations into these conferences have not produced proof of secret governance. Leaked documents, insider accounts, and academic studies suggest that discussions are wide-ranging and often inconclusive. Participants disagree. Ideas are floated and abandoned. No unified agenda emerges. But perception does not require proof. For many observers, the symbolism mattered more than the substance. A small group of powerful people meeting privately in a world where transparency was increasingly demanded felt wrong. It clashed with modern expectations of openness. At the same time, global problems were becoming harder to solve. Financial crises crossed borders, climate concerns required cooperation, technological change outpaced regulation, governments struggled to act alone. Private coordination filled the gaps. This created a paradox. The more interconnected the world became, the more coordination was needed. The more coordination occurred, the more invisible it felt to the public. And the more invisible it felt, the more people suspected hidden control. The Illuminati idea found new ground here, not because of historical continuity, but because of emotional resonance. The name had long stopped referring to an actual organization. It now served as shorthand for a fear that decisions affecting millions were being shaped without consent. What often goes unmentioned is how fragile these elite forms actually are. They have no enforcement power. Participants represent competing interests. Agreements reached in private still have to survive public institutions, laws, and political opposition. Many ideas discussed never leave the room. Yet that nuance rarely travels far. In popular narratives, complexity is flattened. Meetings become councils. Dialogue becomes plotting. Disagreement becomes coordination. The absence of transparency is interpreted as proof of intention. This does not mean public concern is irrational. History has shown that secrecy can be abused. Power concentrated among a few can drift away from accountability. These are real risks. The question is not whether suspicion exists, but how it is formed. By the early 2000s, elite gatherings had become symbols in a larger cultural debate about trust. Who should make decisions? Who should be present when those decisions are discussed? And how much openness is possible in a complex world? As this part comes to a natural pause, one thing is clear. Modern elite gatherings did not create the fear of hidden influence. They inherited it. They stepped into a world already shaped by centuries of secrecy, crisis, and exclusion. Chapter 9, The Internet Age and the Reinvention of the Illuminati. By the time the internet became part of everyday life, the idea of hidden power was already old. What changed was speed. Information no longer moved through books, sermons, or newspapers alone. It moved through screens, forums, videos, and algorithms. Anyone could publish an idea. Anyone could find an audience. And stories that once took decades to spread could now circle the world in hours. This shift transformed how the Illuminati idea existed. Before the internet, most people encountered the Illuminati through history books, political pamphlets, or occasional pop culture references. The topic was distant. It felt historical or symbolic. Online, it became immediate and personal. People were no longer just reading about hidden influence. They were being shown it, at least that's how it felt. Early internet forums in the 1990s played a major role. Message boards dedicated to politics, history, and alternative explanations brought together people who felt disconnected from official narratives. These spaces rewarded pattern seeking. Users compared symbols, traced family names, and linked unrelated events into long chains of meaning. The Illuminati name reappeared as a familiar anchor, a word that could hold many suspicions at once. What mattered was not accuracy, but connection. A music video showed strange imagery. A celebrity made an unusual gesture. A corporate logo resembled an old symbol. Individually, these details meant little. Online, they were stitched together into narratives that felt convincing because they were detailed. Screenshots replaced footnotes. Repetition replaced evidence. Video platforms accelerated this process even further. Documentary-style videos appeared, mixing real historical facts with speculation. The Bavarian Illuminati were mentioned alongside modern politicians, entertainers, and corporations, often without clear separation. To many viewers, the presence of true information at the beginning gave credibility to everything that followed. The format itself created trust. Calm narration, dramatic music, and carefully chosen images gave these videos the tone of serious investigation. Algorithms rewarded engagement, not verification. Content that sparked curiosity or suspicion spread faster than careful historical analysis. Once a viewer watched one video, recommendations led them to dozens more. This created an ecosystem. Within it, the Illuminati were no longer a defunct 18th century group. They were reimagined as a timeless force, adapting to every era. Any powerful institution could be framed as a front. Any coincidence could be presented as intention. The lack of evidence was often reframed as proof of secrecy. Psychologically, this made sense. The modern world is complex and fast-moving. Economic crashes, technological change, and global crises can feel sudden and uncontrollable. When systems are difficult to understand, people look for stories that simplify them. A hidden group pulling strings offers a clear cause for confusing outcomes. Importantly, this does not mean everyone who engaged with these ideas was irrational. Many were responding to real experiences of exclusion, distrust, or disillusionment. They had seen institutions fail. They had watched leaders lie. They had learned correctly that not everything is transparent. The internet gave those feelings a shared language. Social media intensified the effect. Short clips, memes, and slogans stripped ideas down to emotional impact. Complex history became symbols. Context disappeared. A phrase like Illuminati confirmed became both joke and accusation, depending on who shared it. Irony blurred with belief. Celebrities became central figures in this reinvention. Fame itself came to be seen as suspicious. Success was interpreted as evidence of participation in hidden systems. Interviews were dissected. Performances were analyzed frame by frame. Ordinary branding decisions were treated as coded messages. None of this required coordination from above. It emerged organically from online behavior. At the same time, real institutions struggled to respond. Fact-checking moved slower than viral content. Historical nuance did not translate well into short videos. When experts denied claims, their responses were often dismissed as part of the system being questioned. This created a closed loop. Belief fed content. Content fed belief. The Illuminati idea became less about history and more about identity. For some, it represented skepticism toward power. For others, it became a way to explain personal frustration. In extreme cases, it drifted into paranoia. In lighter forms, it became entertainment. What is striking is how little the original Illuminati mattered anymore. The details of Adam Weishaupt, Bavarian politics, or Enlightenment philosophy were often reduced to brief introductions, if mentioned at all. The name remained because it carried emotional weight, not historical relevance. And yet, history still mattered in one way. Because the Illuminati had truly existed, even briefly, the idea never felt entirely fictional. That small anchor in reality allowed endless reinterpretation. Each generation reshaped the story to match its fears. The internet simply accelerated the process. As this part comes to a natural pause, we can see the transformation clearly. The Illuminati of the internet age are not a group. They are a mirror. They reflect how people feel about power, trust, and visibility in a digital world where information is abundant. But understanding is often scarce. Chapter 10. What 108 years of influence really means. When people hear the phrase 108 years of influence, it sounds precise, almost mathematical. It suggests a hidden clock, quietly ticking, measuring the lifespan of secret power. But history rarely works in clean lines. To understand what that number really means, we have to step away from names and symbols and look at patterns. Influence does not move like a shadow government. It moves through habits, institutions, and incentives. It builds slowly, often without intention, and it survives not because it is hidden, but because it becomes normal. If we trace the last century carefully, what we see is not a single group pulling strings, but a series of systems growing more complex than public understanding could keep up with. Banking systems became global. Governments became bureaucratic. Technology moved faster than law. Expertise concentrated in fewer hands because modern problems demanded specialization. This concentration created distance. For most of human history, power was visible. Kings wore crowns, armies marched in the open, taxes were collected face to face. Even when authority was unfair, it was easy to see where it came from. The modern world replaced visibility with abstraction. Decisions now come from committees, algorithms, regulations, and institutions with unfamiliar names. That shift matters more than any secret meeting. Over the last century, people repeatedly experienced moments where their lives changed suddenly. Economic crashes, wars, technological disruption, without a clear cause they could point to. When explanations are technical or delayed, they do not feel satisfying. Humans are storytellers by nature. We look for intention behind outcomes. This is where the Illuminati idea becomes useful, not factual. It offers a human-shaped explanation for system-shaped problems. Instead of faceless processes, there are planners. Instead of randomness, there is design. Instead of complexity, there is control. The story feels complete, even when reality is not. What often goes unnoticed is how often those in power are reacting rather than directing. Historical records show panic behind closed doors, disagreement among elites, and frequent failure. Financial crises were not smoothly managed. Wars were filled with miscalculations. Policies meant to stabilize often created new problems. Perfect control is a myth. Yet belief in control persists because uncertainty is uncomfortable. Accepting that no one is fully in charge can feel more frightening than believing someone is, even if that someone is imagined. When we say 108 years, we are really talking about a period in which transparency struggled to keep pace with complexity. From early central banking reforms to global institutions, from wartime secrecy to digital algorithms, each step added layers between cause and effect. Those layers became interpreted as concealment. This does not mean public suspicion is foolish. History shows that secrecy can be abused. Power can drift away from accountability. Institutions can protect themselves before they protect people. These are real risks, and skepticism plays an important role in challenging them. The problem begins when skepticism hardens into certainty without evidence. At that point, inquiry stops. Every denial becomes proof. Every coincidence becomes confirmation. The story closes in on itself, immune to correction. This is not critical thinking. It is narrative comfort. The most important lesson of the last century is not that hidden rulers exist, but that modern societies struggle to explain themselves. Systems grew faster than shared understanding. Education did not keep pace. Trust eroded. Into that gap stepped stories that felt emotionally true, even when they were historically thin. The Illuminati narrative survived not because it was accurate, but because it adapted. It absorbed fears from each era and reflected them back. In the 18th century, it was about religion and monarchy. In the 19th, about elites and industry. In the 20th, about war and intelligence. In the 21st, about algorithms and digital influence. The name stayed the same. The meaning changed. As we come to the end of this part, one truth becomes clear. There is no single moment where hidden influence began, and no clean date where it can be measured. What we call 108 years is really a way of marking a long transition, from visible power to invisible systems, from personal authority to institutional momentum.